On our newscast tonight, Red Cross officials from South and North Korea meet to discuss the details of long overdue family reunions. Talks went on for more than 6 hours as the two sides tried to work out their differences. A North Korean man, defects, and a South Korean fisherman escapes from the North 41 years after being abducted. Experts weigh in on how the two events could affect inter-Korean relations. And as the bloodshed in Syria continues to escalate, world powers are working on how to respond to allegations that the Syrian government used chemical weapons on its own people. For these stories and more, stay with us.
It is 5 a.m. in New York City, noon in Damascus, and 6 on a Friday evening here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Han-daeun.
And I'm Daniel Chen. Thank you for joining us. It's about time the two Koreas met and discussed family reunion, and that's where we start things off today.
Red Cross officials from South and North Korea are currently at the truce village of Panmunjom to discuss the issue of resuming reunions for families separated since the Korean War.
For more details, we are going to connect live to our Unification Ministry correspondent, Hwang Sung-hee. So, Sung-hee, what's the latest?
Guys, officials from the two Koreas have been locked in negotiations since 10 a.m. this morning. And all we know for now is that North Korea has presented a revised version of its draft proposal. An official at the Unification Ministry said that the two sides have agreed on the idea of holding face-to-face reunions as well as video reunions for the separated families, and that the talks are being conducted in a calm and amicable atmosphere. Opening the talks, Seoul also proposed the idea of holding reunions on a regular basis, as well as allowing family members to exchange letters, although they are first focusing on making the reunions happen. Thousands of Korean families were left separated since the Korean War in the 1950s, and the Unification Ministry estimates that 80% of the 73,000 registered separated family members in the South are over the age of 70. The last round of reunions took place in October of 2010, guys.
Sung-hee, what are some issues on the table?
Well, the officials are starting with technical things like the location, the date, and the scale of the meeting. For now, Seoul is aiming to hold the reunion sometime in the middle of next month to coincide with Chuseok, which is the Korean Thanksgiving holiday, as mentioned by President Park Geun-hye in her Liberation Day speech. Some possible locations for the meeting are Mount Kumgang, Seoul, and Pyongyang, although the most likely venue is Mount Kumgang, which was proposed by North Korea earlier this week. Now, this is also where the last round of reunions took place. The Unification Ministry said it will put a priority on reuniting as many aging family members as possible. So we are expecting the reunion to be much larger than the previous ones, which included some 100 family members from each side. The two sides, meanwhile, are not expected to bring up the issue of restarting South Korean tours to Mount Kumgang at today's meeting. As you know, North Korea proposed yesterday to meet for separate talks on the issue later this month or at the beginning of September, and we are still waiting Seoul's response on that offer, guys.
Well, Sung-hee, thank you for that report. Do keep us updated throughout the day. That was our Unification Ministry correspondent, Hwang Sung-hee, with the latest on the inter-Korean talks for resuming family reunions.
For the second straight day, South Korean company owners with factories at the joint industrial complex in Kaesong crossed the border this Friday to check the conditions of their facilities.
The group of more than 300 people, including government officials and textile factory owners, follows a visit by a separate group of South Korean businessmen a day earlier. The inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex has been shuttered for more than 4 months after the North unilaterally withdrew all its workers.
Amid thawing inter-Korean relations, a North Korean defected to the South on early Friday morning. And it's also been revealed that another man, a South Korean abducted by the North in 1972, escaped the North earlier this month, 41 years after being taken. Our Park Ji-won tells us more.
South Korean fisherman Jeon Uk-pyo was one of 25 people abducted by North Korea in December 1972 when 2 fishing boats were seized by North Korea. Jeon was 27 years old at the time. 41 years after being taken, the 68-year-old abductee finally escaped the North earlier this month. This is according to the president of the abductees' family union, Kaesong, who spoke on Friday. Choi said the abductee is now safe in another country under official protection by the Korean government and will be arriving in South Korea soon. Choi also released a letter that Jeon sent to President Park Geun-hye expressing his wish to spend the rest of his life in his hometown and a desire to be buried on South Korean soil. Meanwhile, another North Korean man defected to South Korea on early Friday. The 46-year-old defector knocked on the door of a home on Gyeodong Island in the West Sea at around 3:40 a.m. Officials believe the man swam across the maritime border to the western island. Authorities are currently questioning the man about his motivation for defecting to the south. Experts say it remains to be seen how this will affect the current improvement in inter-Korean relations. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye met with visiting UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on Friday and discussed ways to increase cooperation between Korea and the UN on pending global issues. In her second meeting with Ban since taking office in February, President Park thanked the Secretary General for showing support for inter-Korean matters. She also stressed that this year, which marks the 60th anniversary since the two Koreas signed the Armistice Agreement, is a significant year for both Korea and the UN, since the Korean War remains the only conflict in which UN troops were deployed. Ban praised President Park's North Korea policy, saying that her push for a trust-building process with the North has made possible the normalization of the Kaesong industrial complex and working-level talks for inter-Korean family reunions.
A special parliamentary probe into allegations that the nation's intelligence agency interfered in last year's presidential election came to an end on Friday. But the ruling and opposition parties couldn't be further apart when it comes to a conclusion over the matter. The two sides even failed to issue a closing report. Our Kim Hyun-ji reports.
At the end of the 53-day probe, ruling party lawmakers reiterated their previous stance that neither the National Intelligence Service nor the Seoul Metropolitan Police did anything that could be deemed inappropriate. Former NIS Director Won Se-hoon stands accused of ordering a systematic smear campaign online against opposition presidential candidates before the December election. Former Seoul Police Chief Kim Yong-pan is accused of forcing a press release of the police probe into the case just 3 days before the election that he knew at the time was false. Ruling party lawmakers said the charges against Won and Kim are unjustified and that prosecutors were wrong to issue such an indictment. However, opposition lawmakers argue that the probe helped uncover evidence that Won and Kim abused their power and purposely influenced the outcome of the presidential election in favor of ruling party. During the probe, a female NIS agent who was caught posting politically sensitive comments online before the election testified that she was only doing her job, responding to North Korean propaganda in cyberspace. Ruling party lawmakers say the agent was only fulfilling her duties. But opposition lawmakers say virtually all of her postings were related to opposition presidential candidates, and very few to North Korea. A police officer who led the investigation into the spy agency scandal at Seoul Suseol Police Station testified that the Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency overseeing her station tampered with her team's investigation. Opposition lawmakers believe there was tampering from above, while the ruling party disagrees. From the get-go, the rival parties had very different ideas about the case, and the probe fell apart many times in the nearly 2-month period. Ruling party lawmakers called the probe to an end Friday, but unsatisfied opposition lawmakers say a team of special prosecutors should step in and probe the secretive intelligence agency. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories. While union members of Hyundai Motor continue on with the partial strikes they've been staging since Tuesday, Korea's automobile industry is groaning over stagnant domestic demand, falling production and exports. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
CEOs from Korean car and auto parts manufacturers and the country's Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, Seo Seung-hwan, recently sat down together to discuss the state of the automobile industry. During the meeting, Minister Seo asked for the company's labor and management to come up with ways to work together in the face of a 6% drop in the nation's automobile exports in the first 7 months of this year from the same period a year ago.
We will have to work towards minimizing negative impacts on the domestic auto industry and also improving those conditions.
The local car industry's production has dropped this year and last year, and the rate of decrease in sales was 5 times greater than in the first 7 months of this year from a year earlier. Domestic sales of Korean auto parts and automobiles also dropped in 2012 and 2013, while exports fell for the first time since 2009. Experts attribute the dip in sales and production to strikes from labor unions at Hyundai Motor and GM Korea.
This is not just a problem limited to Hyundai. Auto parts and other related industries are also taking a blow from the strike.
While Korean automobile makers are trying to keep their heads above water, even at home, local sales of foreign brands rose over 20% as of July this year from the same period a year earlier. It's no surprise that the market share of import cars has now risen to more than 1/10 of the Korean automobile market, almost double that of 2010. Although Korea's car industry is continuing its efforts to overcome the roadblocks of falling production, sales, and exports, automakers such as Hyundai face increasing challenges with ongoing strikes that some say could dim the outlook for the industry. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
The Ministry of Strategy and Finance says it'll closely monitor the sales trend of major food products in Korea ahead of the national Thanksgiving holiday. Vice Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho held a meeting on Friday morning to come up with measures to stabilize food prices and ease the economic burden of consumers before the Chuseok holiday. The ministry said it plans to expand the supply of agro-fishery products as part of efforts to meet rising demand and preempt unreasonable price hikes. The price of a taxi ride in Seoul is about to get a bit pricier. The metropolitan government has passed a bill that'll raise the minimum taxi fare in the capital city from about $2 to $2.70. The move is intended to ease the burden of rising gas prices on taxi drivers and improve their working conditions. The City Council is also reviewing a measure that would extend the hours overnight when overall taxi rates are higher. A final decision will be announced next week. The city government has agreed to freeze bus and subway fares since they were raised just last year.
Korea's fourth multi-purpose satellite, the Arirang 5, has been successfully launched into space. The latest addition to the country's satellite series will provide more comprehensive observation data for Korea, enabling high definition for monitoring at any time under any weather condition. Our Song Ji-sun has the details.
Korea's multi-purpose satellite, Arirang 5, has continually confirmed its successful deployment into its target orbit. The satellite was launched at 11:39 p.m. Thursday night Korea time at Russia's Yasny site in Russia's Dnepr rocket and separated from its fairing and carrier as scheduled. Its first beacon signals were initially picked up by the Troll satellite station in Antarctica 32 minutes following the launch, and at 5:35 a.m. Friday morning Korea time, about 6 hours after blastoff, Arirang 5 made contact with Daejeon's ground station of Korea Aerospace Research Institute. The most notable feature of this latest satellite is its SAR, short for synthetic aperture radar, that can observe and photograph the Earth's surface at any time, regardless of weather conditions.
Arirang 5 emits microwaves that will be reflected after reaching the Earth's surface. That data enable us to obtain three-dimensional images with accurate figures.
After 6 months of adjusting its orbit and testing its assigned tasks, Arirang 5 will orbit the Earth at an average altitude of 550 kilometers, monitoring the ocean, the environment, and natural disasters, along with its predecessors, the Arirang 2 and 3 satellites. 송지선, Arirang News.
Turning now to the latest in Syria, trying to make sense of the horrific video footage, world powers are formulating a response to the Syrian government's alleged use of chemical weapons against its own people. The United Nations and several Western countries are calling for a comprehensive probe to be launched right away. Our Kim Young-gil reports.
Details about what exactly happened remain murky, but Syrian activists claim these people lying lifeless on the ground were the victims of a gas attack carried out Wednesday by Syrian government forces near the capital, Damascus. France's foreign minister says that if the Bashar al-Assad's regime is proven to have used chemical weapons against its own people, the international community has to respond with force.
There would have to be reaction with force in Syria from the international community, but there is no question of sending troops on the ground.
The deputy spokesperson for UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon said Thursday that the attacks needed to be probed without delay.
The Secretary-General remains deeply troubled by the reports of the alleged use of chemical weapons in Syria. The Secretary-General believes that the incidents reported yesterday need to be investigated without delay.
A top UN official has been dispatched to Syria to seek permission for UN investigators to visit the Damascus suburbs that were allegedly attacked. It remains unclear whether the Syrian government will give the inspectors who are already in Syria access to the sites. The U.S. is unable to say whether chemical weapons were used in the alleged attacks, and it is trying to figure out through its own intelligence sources.
At this time, right now, we are unable to conclusively determine CW use.
The Obama administration has said any U.S. response must await confirmation of the attacks. Russia and China has called for a thorough investigation into the attack, adding that the UN chemical weapons inspectors should fully consult with the Syrian government. Syrian activists claim more than 1,300 people were killed in Wednesday's attack. If proven, it would be the world's most deadly chemical weapons attack since the 1980s. The Syrian government continues to deny the army used chemical weapons. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
More than 2 years have passed since the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster, and Japanese authorities are still trying to contain radioactive water from leaking out into the Pacific Ocean.
And while it could take years to get an accurate understanding of what damage has been done, the concerns are very real today, including here in Korea. Our Kim Hyun-bin joins us from the news center to tell us more. So Hyun-bin, how serious is the situation over there?
Well, Tokyo Electric Power Company officials said that plant workers apparently overlooked signs of leaks and failed to notice an open valve for several weeks. The results were 300 tons of water with radioactive particles such as cesium and strontium linked to bone cancer leaking out to the Fukushima Daiichi plant and into the Pacific Ocean. Japan has come up with numerous methods to contain the leak, but all of them have failed so far. The latest idea is building an underground containment wall made of ice to try to halt the flow.
So many attempts before have failed. Are the authorities confident that this latest particular method will work, Hyun-bin?
Well, there's too much uncertainty to be confident. The containment wall won't be completed until 2015, meaning that contaminated water will continue to leak from Fukushima for the next couple of years. If and when it is completed, the wall will be 1.4 kilometers in length, which will make it the world's longest continuous stretch of artificially frozen Earth. But how effective will it be?
It's a serious issue, and it's going to be hard to contain it. First of all, the area is too vast and there are too many radioactive leaks. Concerns and doubts are on the rise about whether they'll be able to successfully seal the leaks.
So, Hyunbin, you said 300 tons of radioactive water has leaked out so far. How's that going to affect us here in Korea and the rest of the international community?
Well, the majority of the radioactive materials are cesium, strontium, and tritium. That is what's flowing from the water at Fukushima. Of those materials, cesium is most predominant. It makes up nearly 90% of the radioactive substances, and it can travel in water, while the other two, strontium and tritium, sink to the ocean floor because they are too heavy. These two substances are the ones you have to worry about because they can accumulate in your body for roughly 30 years. But since they sink to the bottom of the ocean floor, there's little concerns to be had. For a better understanding of what is going on, let's have a look at a graph. The Fukushima disaster occurred in March 2011, leaking hundreds of tons of radioactive water and hundreds of thousands of becquerels into the ocean, a becquerel being the way radioactivity is measured. The radioactive materials traveled in ocean currents to the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and as time goes on, the radioactive levels of those materials traveling around the Pacific will diminish. Currently, the materials is estimated to contain 4 becquerels of radiation per cubic meter, which is 2 becquerel increase from before the accident. By 2016, the current will move the contaminated water to Western Canada or the northwestern U.S., and by that time, the contaminated water will be at 3.5 becquerels, a slight decrease from its current level. By the time the water makes its way all around the Pacific and back to Korea, it will be the year 2022 or so, and by that time, the contamination level will have decreased to its normal state from before the accident, to about 2 becquerels per cubic meter.
Well, right now it seems like the post-Fukushima danger is very real, and here in Korea there's been some controversy over imported fish from Japan with high amount of radioactive materials found in them. So what is the Korean government doing to prevent this, Hyunbin?
For that, let's take a look at our chart. The Korean government set a safe limit of radiation in food at 300 becquerels per kilogram. If food items are under that level, they have a green light to be imported into Korea. The highest radiation level found in a fish imported from Japan since 2011 was 97 becquerels, nowhere near the limit. Japan lowered its import limit from 500 to 100 becquerels in April 2012. Other countries like the U.S. have limits as high as 1,200.
But Hyunbin, we've been taught to believe that all radioactive particles are bad for humans. Is that not the case?
Well, an expert I spoke with can answer that question for us.
300 becquerel is a really low amount, and if you eat and almost every day, and it is going above those limit of the 5 millisievert in a year. So, if you consume just one time or maybe several times, it doesn't matter at all, because we observed almost other radioactive sources such as potassium-40 is abundant in the food. And so other food is very natural sources.
So basically, Dr. Kang is saying that radiation is all around us, and even if humans were to eat a fish contaminated with cesium, whatever radiation were to enter the body will be released in time, with no ill effects. Experts I have talked to, as well as others throughout the world, believe the levels of radiation are not much of a concern at this point in time, and would only become a concern if highly radioactive fish from near the disaster site is imported.
Okay, thank you so much for that very insightful report, Hyunbin.
That was our Kim Hyunbin reporting live for us on the radioactive leaks from Fukushima.
It's time to get a check on the weather conditions with our Hannah Kim. Hannah, the rain has cleared up in the central provinces, but how's it looking down in the south?
Well, Daniel, the weather conditions there are quite different. We actually have heavy rain in the bottom half of the country.
I hear some regions are getting up to 20 millimeters of rain per hour.
That's right, Taeun, and we expect over 120 millimeters of rain in some parts of the North Jeolla and North Gyeongsang provinces, while the southern coast has anywhere from 30 to 100 millimeters of precipitation. Now, I personally don't like rain, but it will definitely help with this ongoing drought in the south and, of course, the summer heat. If we take a closer look at tomorrow's forecast, Seoul will start off the morning at 23 and reach 33 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, cities in the south should have rain until Saturday afternoon, as Gwangju and Busan peak to 30 and 28 degrees respectively. Down on Jeju Island, the showers will be lighter, but you'll have cloudy skies. Daejeon will hit 32, while Dokdo and Mount Kumga drop to the lower 20s. Well, that's Korea for you. I'm Hannah Kim, and back to you guys.
Thank you for that, Hannah. And that's all from us for this week. Thank you for watching. This has been Daniel Che.
And I'm Han Daeun. Keep it tuned to Arirang for more news coming up.